Hello and welcome to Wirelive episode 5. Another fantastic episode with another interesting theme. You'll be very pleased or very disappointed, depending on your stance on my hosting abilities, to hear that I'm not going to be hosting today. Today's episode is all about modern brand presence and all the kind of weird and wonderful things that it's become. And when we were putting this together, along with inviting 3 amazing experts who we'll introduce in a moment on the subject, we realized that I'm not the person that's qualified to talk about this in the Wirelive team. And actually, it would be far more sensible of me to hand over the reins to one of our managing partners, Chloe, who was previously our marketing director and kind of comes from the world of marketing and brand herself, who I'm sure will do a much better job than I can of steering the traffic through this conversation. So I'm really looking forward to being a spectator, like all of you watching this for today. I'll be sat on the other side of the camera for the rest of this interview, listening carefully and hopefully learning something about brand and what not to do, frankly, as much as what to do. Without any further ado, we're just going to reset the studio, bring in Chloe to introduce our guests. So back in a moment.
Hello, everyone. Really pleased to be joining you today live from the Wirelive studio. First time back in the office for me for 5 months, and it's great to be here. And just want to introduce our amazing guests for today. We've assembled a great panel to talk about modern brand presence. So first up, we have Ash Jones, who is CEO of Great Influence. Ash has helped build some of the UK's biggest CEO brands, including the likes of Steve Bartlett from Social Chain. We're also joined by Conrad Sanders, who is CEO of the Creative Copywriter. Conrad is an amazing wordsmith and has a penchant for building great GIFs on LinkedIn, if you've not seen them. And finally, Rob Walker, who's head of content from Blend. Rob is an amazing wordsmith and writer, and he's going to be talking about how he works with a great team at Blend to sell amazing copy for products and services. So, guys, can I just ask you to start with telling us how and why did you get into the world of brand? Rob, can you kick us off?
Sure. Hello. How did I get into brand? I very much had a desire to do something with the ability to write, and I'm very much a failed script writer. And so I decided to put my work to slightly more better and more productive use. And getting into brands really kind of opened my eyes up to ways of sort of taking copywriting and using it in a way that is kind of different to ways that you learn it in school and stuff like that. And over the last 10 years, I've just been sort of like plodding along from there, really. I've worked in-house, working on some big alcohol brands, and working in agency quite a lot, working with all sorts of things, B2C, and now I work in B2B here at Blend, where we've been, sort of like trying to bring branding in kind of new, interesting ways alongside as part of the inbound package to our customers. So yeah, that's how I've got into it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob. Ash, can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into brand?
So I was part of the founding team at an agency called Social Chain, which is a social media agency. And my role there was, I was the marketing director. It was a startup at the time. And I essentially had to figure out how to get the name of the agency out there to other agencies and brands alike, as we had no awareness at the time. And I tried every single conventional method of B2B marketing to do that, and none of them worked for us. So our option was to go down the route of personal branding for the CEO, which in the first 12 months, he did a lot of public speaking, and that really worked in terms of new business development. So rather than carry on failing at a lot of the conventional B2B marketing approaches, we decided to lean heavily into the one that was really working. And I started working with Steve Bartlett, the CEO of Social Chain there, helping him build his personal brand. And then that was an incredibly successful project. And then I left in the middle of 2018 to set up on my own to help other CEOs and founders to leverage their personal profiles to help raise more awareness for their business ventures.
Fantastic. What a great story. And last but no means least, Conrad, how did you get into the wonderful world of brand?
Well, hello everyone. First of all, thanks for the warm introduction. I'm going to try to avoid telling you my entire agency story because that would probably take up the whole hour. Go off on tangents too. Well, I think much like Robert, I was always a bit of a wordsmith. I always enjoyed writing. At uni, I studied philosophy, which is one of those subjects you choose when you're 19 and no one tells you to actually choose a subject that's practical. So you just go and do humanity, and left to go to Australia straight after. Got into sales first, actually, so face-to-face sales, which I would later use in written form as a copywriter. And yeah, I won't. Again, it's a long story, but I ended up discovering what copywriting was, becoming and SEO at the same time. Became a freelance copywriter, and quite quickly understood that copywriting is an integral part of branding, right? So creating a voice for a brand is essentially, branding is, I suppose, personifying a company, and a voice is giving the words and the accent and the style to that person, to that personified company. So yeah, I think through the route of copywriting, I understood what branding was, and also running my own agency and growing it, I very quickly understood how important it was for myself and for our agency to really differentiate, to really stand out in a sea of competitors and in a sea of content saturation. Even when I used to go networking, the reason why I wear this hat, for example, which is part of the kind of brand identity, I just quickly realized there's all these guys in suits. How am I going to stand out? And I sort of learned through self-exploration how important brand was to us, and try to kind of transfer that to our clients.
That's fantastic. I love the story about the hat as well. And it's really interesting with Ash on the podcast because obviously I think most people knew Stephen Bartlett because of his hat. So clearly you're on for a winner there.
The guy in the hat. Yeah,
the guy in the hat.
I'll tell you what, I think I was around before Stephen Bartlett, so he copied me, right? That's
you're the original. You heard it here first, everyone.
Much more successful with it, yeah.
Well, thanks guys for introducing yourself. So what I wanted to start with, and asking perhaps a slightly facetious question, as we're kind of all on team brand, but we're sat here in the middle of a global pandemic, a recession's about to hit, and we're all trying to figure out how we keep on working. Why should we be sat here worrying about brand? Why does brand matter?
When you're in times like this, and particularly in our space for B2B, you find as soon as trouble starts rumbling, like first place that gets cut is marketing, and then it's IT, because you pull everything back in, and that really is not the right thing to do, because you can't ride the wave if you don't kind of drive into it a little bit, and you've got to keep going no matter how bad the situation is out there in the world. And branding, particularly in a way that is socially conscious, that kind of acknowledges a crisis situation like we're in now, is will put you in a much better position for future business and allow you to make your way out of a recession. So I think now it's never been more important to be thinking about what your brand is, what your brand stands for, and how you're going to get out into the world.
Brilliant. Yeah. Conrad, what do you think?
I'll start by, I think, talking quickly about why I think brand is important in normal times. I like to sort of explain sometimes to clients and the world out there that, think of your ideal target buyer and what they do when they wake up. They wake up, they jump on their phone, they're probably jumping between 5 different apps. Throughout that day, they will be exposed to apparently between 4,000 and 10,000 ads, right? That's just ads. Think how much content that they'll see, or at least teasers to pieces of content. Essentially, throughout the day, they have businesses and people saying, look at me, I want your attention, right? And so I think the first reason why brand is so crucial is because of saturation and noise and competition, and the fact that it's just incredibly hard to stand out, and increasingly so as more businesses are online and as more businesses are in social. So I think that brand is so important to stand out, to grab and grip attention, and also to very quickly convey that feeling of trust, and to give someone a gut feeling, because they often don't have they don't have time these days to weigh up every feature and function in order to make a decision. I think both even in the B2B world. So it's crucial to, brand plays into the gut feel that someone has about a company and whether they trust you and like you and want to work with you, because of that lack of time and because of the noise and because of the saturation. And I'd say that right now, I'd second what sort of Rob's saying, that I'd say it's even more important to focus on brand right now. And there's a lot of evidence showing that during previous recessions, like in 2008, companies that just cut marketing spend found it much more difficult to climb out the hole at the other end of it. And those that were consistent with their comms and their content and focused on things like long-term benefits, so not just forcing sales, things like growing brand awareness and content marketing, they came out on top, and they gained a greater share of voice, which led to a greater share of market. And I think the reason, especially now, why it's so important is because fewer people are in buying mode, right? In a recession, fewer people have their credit cards out, are ready to buy, because they're kind of in panic mode or they're holding back. If they're not ready to buy, you can't sell to someone who's not ready to buy. You can't just hit them with an even more salesy ad. It doesn't work. And therefore, I think the best use of a marketing spend is focusing on this long-term gain through growing brand awareness, through content marketing, providing value, so that you come out on top and end all this.
It's really interesting. Ash, what's your perspective on this?
I would say it's always important, and it's I guess it's kind of obvious to say that during this period it's more important than ever. But I think that the whole thing will have just leaned businesses out. Like, they have to cut in a lot of places, and rather than cut to create weakness, I think the smart ones have gone leaner in the areas that they have anyway. Like, they've kept everything that they do. They've just made things a lot leaner. And usually when you make things leaner, it just makes things better. So I think you're seeing a lot of people that have not cut marketing, but have just, I guess, cut away the fat. I would assume that a lot of brands and businesses beforehand had waste in all areas of the business that were unnecessary. I think that's just a normal fact. And yeah, I don't think it's a case of like brand is more important or brand is less important. I think it goes without saying that brand is always important, regardless of what's happening. But hopefully the past couple of months will have made things a bit leaner for some businesses and brands, and that's always a better thing. It makes it stronger.
If I can add to that, I'd say that I think a worry there is that businesses will see brand as being fat, as being the fat to trim. Obviously, they're not going to destroy their logo, but the ongoing brand awareness, the things that we need to do to keep our brand prominent within a market. And back to my point about kind of share of voice, I think that there's an opportunity, if you're not going to just completely cut marketing spend, stop putting content out there, for example. If others are in your market, then there's even more of an opportunity to raise your brand profile, right? Because even if we're looking at ad spend, for example, ad spend goes down in a time of recession because there's less competition, right? So if you have to be lean, obviously, everyone has budgets, but if you are using it wisely and still maintaining your share of voice and that brand awareness, because others are perhaps cutting down on that, there's even more of an opportunity to grow your brand awareness within a particular market.
Yeah, and it's all about, like, one of the little values of brand, like you said, Conrad, is about people aren't in a buying mode now, but you set the scene for when the time is right. You are the one that's on top, and you don't have to rush back to market because you've always been there and everybody knows that you're there. So when the turnaround time comes back, you're in the most prominent position. I think that's where, sort of, in terms of, like, when you think about how that whole sales process is going to work, like, where branding is always in the vanguard, so it's always got to be at the front of any activity that you're doing.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I think so. What I'm hearing there is it's all about the long term, and it's not necessarily cut brand. It's just get leaner and use your budget a bit more smartly. You're all currently sort of working agency side at the moment, and you know, what you say makes a lot of sense, but I bet there's probably a lot of marketers out there who are having to justify every penny they're spending at the moment. And unfortunately, brand has a reputation of being a bit fluffy. And I just wondered if you're seeing a lot of pressure on your clients around justifying spend. And equally, I think we talk about modern brand presence. I think one of the curses in some way around modern branding is that we have so much data now around attribution. The expectation around how well you can attribute activity has almost kind of undermined branding, because it's in many ways it's really hard to attribute the ROI to the work you do. So are you seeing, and what advice would you give to any sort of marketeers out there who are trying to battle to keep, you know, those long-term investments going and keep their brand front of mind during this difficult time?
I mean, I would say it's always, you always got to prove your value, right? So, you know, and as you say, proving ROI on particularly on brand work is notoriously tricky. You've got so many channels, but, you know, the first thing I would say is, you know, you've got to prove a business case. So use historical data. Now, as Conrad said, in previous recessions, brands that did certain activities got certain results, and this is not the first recession that we've ever experienced in our lifetimes, and it's probably not going to be the last. So, you know, there is data out there you can use to really back up your point and make that business case. I mean, I know from our perspective, we're all about sort of trying to constantly generate, you know, and demonstrate the value of the work that we do for our clients, and, you know, where they're having issues with sort of brand awareness activity, particularly with clients who lean a lot more on public events and all that kind of stuff, like having to transition into webinar activity and more online activity. That is where we're sort of like suggesting people pivot, you know, and, you know, where there is a question around, around spend, it's more about sort of like trying to reallocate, as you say, get leaner and kind of channel it in ways that are going to be more effective given the resources we've got to hand.
What about you, Ash? What are you seeing with your clients at the moment?
Well, I do personal branding, and it's a huge brand awareness play. There's no metrics to tie like the effectiveness of it. It's just something that you have to trust the process of. It's almost like it's a door opener and it's a conversation starter. It's not the close. Mm-hmm. So when the lockdown happened and a lot of businesses were taking hits, I wondered, as everyone did, like what's going to happen with my business and my clients right now. And the opposite started happening, in that the clients that I was working with started leaning more into doing, like focusing on their personal brand. And I also got a lot more interest in my service. And I think the reason for that was just that marketing budgets were being cut. And how can you still, as a business, do marketing and raise awareness for what you're doing and create a touch point for people that feels organic whilst you've not got much resource in marketing? Like, people furlough their marketing team. And I think that's why I saw people leaning into it more, because it's anyone that's in B2B will understand, like, LinkedIn at the minute is a CEO's best friend. In terms of helping create a very organic and authentic touch point for people. And I think the fact that budgets were cut, people were furloughed, but there was still an understanding that you should still do marketing in some way, shape or form during this period. And that, coupled with the fact that you have to be, I felt like everyone had to be a lot more authentic and less staged and crafted and campaigned. And it just created this, I guess, a perfect storm for the kind of thing that I do, I guess. So yeah, that's it from my point of view.
That's really interesting. I must admit, when I was thinking about this and just my own observations, it just felt like when the pandemic hit, personal branding just took off. So it's really interesting to hear that you've seen that in form of direct inquiries and increased work. I was wondering how much the pandemic had something to do with it. I guess in a situation where we're all in a very similar existential crisis, albeit experiencing it very differently from very different positions. I think that cry for authenticity has really come through at the moment, and it's really interesting to hear that that's backed up by the amount of inquiries you're getting and the work you're doing. What about you, Conrad? How are you finding conversation with clients at the moment around keeping up that brand investment?
I think these guys have made both really good points. I think that, on the one hand, what Rob has said about, in terms of trying to demonstrate ROI and value, which is such an important thing for an agency, whatever type of marketing you're involved in, historical data, like you said, it is key, and looking at what has worked and what is working. And you mentioned marketers within a business having to do this. We've had to do it as agencies, right? This is probably one of the reasons why we're saying, yeah, branding works. We would say that, right? Because we're involved in it and we believe it, and but we're involved in that, and we've had to sort of argue our case. And for us specifically, we did a series of first with clients and then webinars based on sort of crisis comms, what to do in a crisis, where we looked at data, exactly what Robert said. We looked at sort of stats from the Institute of Practitioners of Advertising, looked at previous companies where there was evidence to show that those companies that had focused on brand and things like content marketing and increasing share of voice during the previous recession came out on top. Because, of course, their budgets have become something that are scrutinized more. And I think that, again, over to what Ash has said, you have to do something, right? So maybe they're cutting marketing spends, but everyone knows they need to do something during this time. They still need leads and sales, right? That's the issue. And you can't just hit they will, I'm sure lots of companies quickly realize, and this happened with some of the big brands that we work with, they quickly realized that what they tried at first didn't work. And I won't mention names, but one of the fashion brands we worked with, they just in Spain and Italy tried to hit hard with these ads on across social with discounts for shoes, right? And they had the same sort of photos from a photo shoot they'd done last year or whenever prior to the lockdown, with these models out and about on the town, like wearing shoes, and they got this really bad lashback from their audience. Saying, well, what do you expect us to buy these shoes for? To walk to the supermarket? It went from a PR perspective, it was terrible. So they did that first. Their first kind of move was, right, let's just push harder. And we've had, again, with another company, the salespeople just jumped on the phones and tried to squeeze sales out of their prospects. Again, very bad for PR for their brand, essentially. And it wasn't working because they weren't in buying mode, they didn't have budgets, and it's aggressive to do that. So we kind of tried to help educate them that while brand and content marketing you can sort of track, but while long-term brand awareness might be harder to prove right now exactly what ROI you're going to get from every pound or dollar you put into it, what you're doing isn't working and it's having an adverse effect. So let's look at historical data. Let's talk about, this slightly less tangible, longer term approach that will help you build relationships over time with these prospects. And like we said before, kind of warm them up until the point when they are ready to buy, when they are in buying mode. You are their trusted advisor. You're their go-to brand. You're their friend. You've helped them with educational, valuable content, and rather than just trying to squeeze sales and here's a discount and here's that clearly wasn't working, and even worse than not working, it was having an adverse effect.
Yeah, it definitely seems in that example they kind of forgotten the fundamental rules of marketing, which is understand your audience and understand what they need at that time. Their audience did not need shoes. No one needed shoes. We weren't going anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I think going back to the personal branding element, I think the other thing is, like, from a practical perspective, it's looking at the situation you're in where everybody's suddenly like on Zoom, having to communicate through day-to-day communications, and then you're thinking about marketing activity you can do, and you can't do your big events, you can't do whatever you had queued up for Q2 because it was all assumed that people were able to go out and buy things or do whatever. It's it seems to be like a sort of the natural evolutionary step of being like, well, what assets do we have that don't cost anything, and who's sitting at home not doing very much at the moment? CEO. He's working from home, he's in front of a camera, so if you can get a CEO in, and then she's out there putting out the branding stuff, it's like free asset, isn't it, in many ways? So it's sort of like, it's not like not the cheaper option, but it's sort of like a more budget conscious way of being proactive with your marketing.
Definitely. And I think because obviously a lot of challenges was the CEO's most precious asset was time. And suddenly what did everyone, not necessarily have an abundance, but you lost with the traveling and the meetings and all of that time that used to just be taken as writ that was gone, that suddenly became available. So I think you're right, it just completely reshaped the landscape. Ash, if I could just come to you, I think we've spoken a lot about personal branding. Obviously, this is your area of expertise. But for those people who aren't as familiar, who maybe just thought LinkedIn got a bit noisy because everyone was a bit bored, stuck at home, what can you just kind of give us a quick overview around where you see the value of personal brand, and how can people get started if they've not tried this avenue yet with their limited marketing budget?
Yeah.
Oh, have we lost Ash? Would someone else like to take that
I
question?
think Varley, from working at Social Chain and seeing the impact of my ad, am I still here?
Yes, you're still here, sorry. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the delay was our end or your end, but you are back.
Have you got me?
We've got you.
No? Yeah? Okay.
We've got you.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, Social Chain, personal people within the agency that focused on personal branding as well. And it had an impact on sales, it had an impact on client relationships, it had an impact on hiring, it had an impact on the investment that came into the company. So I just feel it's a complete no-brainer at this point when we're at a stage where LinkedIn is on a growth and scale journey and a lot more people are using it. So I don't think the point is like, why do personal branding? I just think the timing now is very interesting in that, especially since lockdown and a lot of businesses took real big hits, I feel it took away a lot of the pretentiousness that existed on the platform that maybe put people off doing it beforehand. So LinkedIn, very it was win-win-win, success, shiny, like all good, all happy. There was nothing really real on there. It was very rare that people would be real on there. And I don't mean real as in like negative or talking about the bad things, just being an open, transparent book as a business. Everything was very protected. And when lockdown happened, everyone found themselves in the same boat where they're having to go through a lot of these negative things within their business or challenging things within the business. And one by one, you started seeing a domino effect of people that beforehand wouldn't use LinkedIn to talk about those challenges, all of a sudden were talking about those challenges. And it, like I say, it created this domino effect across a number of like senior leaders on the platform where they all of a sudden started thinking, oh, I can use this platform to talk about something other than the award win or the new client. And I think it's just time with like Steve Bartlett, the CEO of Social Chain, he says within his talks that now in an era of like platforms like Glassdoor, you have public company culture. You can go on Glassdoor and see what someone's culture is like. So if that exists, then rather than leaning against it and having your culture as like a black box, he says the best thing to do is to have your culture as a glass box, which is like, let people look inside it, let them see what's happening within it in a transparent way and make their own mind up about their perception of who you are as a business. Rather than what happens now is a lot of businesses will sit down, they'll have the strategy, they'll have the framework, they know how they want to position themselves and what they want people to think of them, and they'll try to push that perception on people. Whereas it's much the opposite. Like, just create a transparent glass box and document the things that you're going through and talk about the challenges that you're having and the opportunities that you're having and the journey of it all. And let people make their own minds up about the business. Don't try to force things on them. And I think that is the thing that's coming in now to personal branding, especially where it's moving away from personal branding was always something that people thought, even the term suggests that you sit down and create something that didn't exist before. And people like Gary Vaynerchuk made it this big thing that had, you needed a huge team and it all had to be crafted and staged and perfectly done. And I think it's shifting away from that massively now and into something that's a lot more authentic. And I think that's the power of it right now. The more it moves into that authenticity, the more powerful it becomes, because people buy from people, and more importantly, people buy from real people that they trust. And you can't build trust without being authentic to whoever you are.
That's so true.
Can I? Oh, sorry.
Please
Can I jump
please
on
go
that?
ahead.
Yeah, so I put a video out, which I don't know if you guys have seen recently, on my own personal brand channel in LinkedIn. So you might have seen that I've been getting a bit louder on there. How to be real, and how to be real for real. And it's, touching on a lot of the points that Ash mentioned there. And the thing that is quite interesting for me is that, an age-old copywriting trick is admitting weakness, right? So you can read this in kind of copywriting books written 60, 70 years ago. And in fact, conversational real copy, real talk, as we like to call it, also was working, 70, 80, 90 years ago. It's what converted, because, as Ash said, people buy from people, right? So if you admit a weakness, a perfect example from a huge, long-lasting campaign is Avis. We all know Avis is, we're number 2, so we try harder. So that's a very nice little succinct use of that copywriting trick. You're going to trust someone that says that, rather than we're the best in the world. And I think that just across businesses, they've never really caught on. Not enough, in my opinion. Not enough companies really invest in the art and science of copywriting. It's kind of the last thing on the it's the last thing on your sort of budget list. But that kind of authenticity, conversational copy, admitting weakness, has worked for a really long time, most of the last century. But I think especially in the B2B world, there's just been this fakeness. I think it broke through more in the B2C world, but this kind of, I think it's mimicry is the problem. Copycats, like, oh, this is the way it's always been. So this is how I should finish my email, with kind regards, because that's what someone taught me to do at school. And then this and that. Why? What does that mean? Anything? Why would you say kind regards? Do you say that at home? Do you talk like this at home? That's one, for me, the litmus test for writing copy, wherever it is, on social, in your emails, on your website as well. That works. Do you talk like that at home? There's all these just weird traditional norms that just seeped into the business world, that people just have replicated and copied without giving it much thought, or actually looking into the data, because you can look at lots of data to show that, split testing, 2 landing pages, one with real talk, real conversational copy, authenticity, admitting a weakness where possible, will outperform against the flashy, jargonful, cliched, business corporate talk. There's plenty of data to support it. I just feel like perhaps now, as Ash said, perhaps the business world is starting to wake up to that more and more so, and starting to see more examples of it working with this kind of personal branding, where they think, hang on, I could do the same. I'm a person, I'm unique, I've got things to say, I've got my own perspective. Maybe I could do that without putting on this weird front. So yeah, that's my 2 pence.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really interesting there, where you talk about copycats, because like particularly in the B2B space, and at particularly the enterprise level, you look at like the really big players, they all watch each other really closely, and anybody who's sort of in that middling space always looks at the blue chips and be like, okay, we want to be like that. Rather than trying to be yourself, you're too busy trying to define yourself based on other people, and it's sort of like led into this homogenized, jargon-filled sort of like landscape of words that just, it doesn't mean anything to anybody anymore. I think where we're starting to see the change is certainly in the fact that technology is allowing us to new generations of CEOs to come in, build startups very, very quickly, and not have to rely on like having been in business for like the last 80 years to be able to be a player on the world stage. And that means that you've got it's not just disruptive brands, that are breaking up their industries individually, but it's also the way that they think about business. I think that is where the opportunity, and that's where the transformation is starting to occur, where you've got these younger people who aren't held up by the kind of the blue chip Wall Street kind of perspective on the world. They want to try and drive their own voice and have their own change. And I think that's why we're starting to see a change today. And I think you're right. People are starting to be more switched on to trying not to be like, your granddad's company. There's a long holdout of like, trust means you've got to be established. It means you've got to have some air of authority and tradition about you. But you can do all of that and have a unique personal voice. Like it is possible to do both. All you have to do is think about it.
Definitely.
That's really interesting.
Bear with me. I'm just going to move to another room. I think it's a little loud where I am. Sorry, apologies. Bear with me a few seconds.
Welcome to Cribs.
I'll add a little point. Cribs. Yeah, it's a nice crib. Come, let's see the crib.
Wow.
Can I just add one?
I'm actually go on. Sorry.
Tiny little point to that. My worry again with this vicious cycle of mimicry that happens. My worry is that all of a sudden CEOs like myself suddenly putting out video content on LinkedIn, a certain type, and again there are recipes that are working, right? You can see them working. My worry is that again that will be copied, right? There'll be saturation, and I talk about this thing called the copy and twist technique. It obviously makes sense to copy what's working, right? That is a very intuitive thing to do as a marketer, but you need to give it your unique spin, and I think that's where the essence of branding, right, is not create whatever the best market leader in your market has done. It's the keys of branding. Unique is one of them. Authenticity. So those two things. If you're going for, not a value proposition, a unique value proposition, then inherently you will need to look at what's out there and work out how to zig while the industry's zagging. That's not to say, don't take the elements that are working, and use them. But I think it's this blend of. I think what's needed is this blend of understanding, the recipe that's working, that's making things go viral, that's building a personal brand up, but then making it your own at the same time, rather than just copying.
That's so true. And I think what I'm slightly hopeful for, which is strange because normally I'm quite cynical, but that actually where I've seen people really start to build their own personal brands and use LinkedIn during this time, I think it also represents a very human need to connect. And I think perhaps that's why people have really started to get into this, not because they've figured out they've got no money and there's some great stats around personal branding, maybe we should give this a try now. I think perhaps what you may see with perhaps some older generations getting involved, or people trying it who've known about it but never done it before, finally had that push. I think perhaps it also fulfills a need in them that has gone from not being able to work in an office, not being able to go to meetings, go networking, meeting people, and actually really using these social media platforms for the whole kind of purpose they were designed for, which is social, which is making connection, having a conversation with people. Maybe I'm being a bit idealistic, but I do see from my experience of people I'm speaking to that actually they're finding this journey incredibly rewarding, A, because it's such a breath of fresh air, but B, because they're starting to forge real connections with people like them or people they want to speak to through these social platforms that before were just about money, stats, engagement, and eyeballs.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's part of the reason. Oh, sorry, you go.
I think is a really good point, because you can't. In the last 5 months, you can't really meet up for a coffee with people. You can't. For me, it was all about. I think I spoke at an event once, and I was saying, like, at an event, you might meet someone at an event, and you might not see them for another 12 months in person. And the idea with online is like, if you do it correctly, you can plug the gaps between those 12 months when you see someone offline. And when you next see them, rather than them asking, how are things going, they say, oh, everything looks like it's going great. I saw you did this, this, and this. And so for the past 5 months, when you can't see anyone offline, the online in terms of networking becomes a really important factor. I think it's a really good point that no one's kind of made about this whole thing as well.
Sorry, Rob, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I think you're right, Ash. I think that the point of making those personal connections is part of the reason why podcasting, we're seeing podcasting and VODs like this, this kind of activity is exploding right now. And part of that is this need that people have for feel like they're connected to people. And when you've got somebody in your ears for hours on end, you start to feel like you built up a relationship with that person, even though it's only a one-way conversation, and now we're talking like sort of old-timey radio, like, it's sort of like that was the bastion of brand trust was, who was the guy that you spoke to and you heard every day? You're listening to your Jim Humbles, and you're like, well, that guy knows what he's talking about. Well, it's just I hear him all the time, And I think that's, if you ever wanted to justify a reason for doing certain activities like this, I think podcasting is a really good thing to look at and to say, like, this is why it's doing so well. It's because it's a personal connection that people make through the human activity of communication. It's not digital, it's not signs or anything like that. It is just voice to ears, and that is something that we need more of now when we're all at home on our own.
Thanks,
yeah,
Rob.
and I'd say, just even from a personal perspective, everything that you guys have just said, it points and leads to the fact that video content outperforms written content. As much as like I've been writing, I think, pretty good LinkedIn copy for a while, daily updates. Started doing video, which is quite recent. Well, I got the GIFs in first, which you've probably seen around.
The GIFs were strong.
Yeah, at least me. So there's a bit more. There's me doing something fun. There's a bit more personality there, right? Naturally, as much as I'm big on the word side of things, naturally, if it's me there and there's a video and I'm talking, it's the next best thing to what Ash said, which is actually being in the room with someone and building a relationship. So, for us personally, the videos that we put up have just massively outperformed and gone, sort of, as opposed to maybe let's 20, 30 sort of reactions, gone up to sort of 200 just by doing a few. And yeah, it's nice to see, and plus tangible results as well. I didn't think that, because we've sort of been growing my personal brand through video very recently, only got a month's worth of content. I thought, right, this is a long-term benefits kind of strategy we're doing here. But there's been tangible. We've got quite a few leads just from people saying, oh, I love that content, I love what you have to say there, I want to work with you, which personally I felt I was quite amazed. I really didn't think we'd be getting actual tangible leads immediately off the back of it. So back to the kind of ROI and value, we're literally seeing it there. We can actually probably do the maths and work out, how much money we got from those leads and how much we put in, and work it out. It's not just hoping for this end position of authority. It's literally happening after a month of doing it.
So actually, you might end up being your own case study to take to your clients about this approach.
Pretty much, yeah. That's what's happening, and it's exciting.
Brilliant. So we've spoken quite a bit, danced around the edges of social media. We've spoken about LinkedIn. Do you think that social media and ability to use social media is critical now to brand building? Rob, what do you think?
Well, I mean, you put yourself where your audience is. It's as simple as that. So if your audience is on social, that is where you need to go. It's as simple as that. Particularly in a time where we are all, digital is such a huge part of people's lives now. You can't ignore the fact that it is going to be where people are. But you need to be selective, right? You don't want to be on TikTok if you're, if you're targeting CEOs that are only living in LinkedIn. So you've got to be selective, certainly. But I think, without a doubt, like social media is where you need to be if that's where your audience is.
Yes. Yeah. So, sorry, please continue.
I'd say, it's about touch points, isn't it? I think branding is about, and I touched on some of the keys of branding before. I said, your brand needs to be unique, it needs to be memorable, it needs to be durable, but it also needs to be consistent, and consistency is key, and that means across all touch points. And for me, a lot of, especially B2B brands, just don't think it through, and I think the root of that is overestimation. And there's this cognitive bias that I think most marketers suffer from, which is the curse of knowledge, right? Which is basically they know what they know and want to say, and often that leads to lots of marketing mistakes, especially with messaging.
Mm.
Because the context's different. You spend weeks, months writing, the messaging for your website, and you're in the boardroom going, yeah, that feels right, that's great, but not realizing that actually your prospects might be there for 2 seconds, read it for 2 seconds, and so it's not clear enough, which is often a problem with B2B marketing messaging. And I'd go one step further than that and say that there's, not just an overestimation of how much people understand you, but an overestimation of how much people care, an overestimation of how people perceive how unique or memorable you are. So often there might be a brand exercise where you'll work with the internal team and you'll come up with these values, and you'll say, like, innovation is one of our values, it's 4 values, and it will take months, and then you'll put it on your about page and you'll pat each other on the back and be like, that's great, now they'll think that we're unique and different because we define these values, and then they're on the about page that most people aren't even reading. For me, it's about, don't overestimate, underestimate, go further. How can you create specific, tangible, and even physical manifestations of those values and of that unique value proposition? How can you, if your brand were a color, what would it be? If your brand, and why? And what can you do with that? If it were a texture, what would it be and why? And how could you somehow include that in your marketing collateral? If it were a musical genre, what would it be and why? If it were a fashion style, the more you go, the more excessive. These are all touch points. These are all reasons for people to go, oh yeah, I get it. That's the gut feeling I get about them. And that's why I think you can B2B should borrow elements from B2C. If you think of McDonald's, right, one of the most famous brands ever, happiness is probably one of the things, as a child especially, that you think of McDonald's. They have a meal called a Happy Meal. They have a clown as their brand character. It's bright yellow and red. And I think B2B just think, you don't need to do that. Let's just go and just come up with some values and just put them on an about page, and not really thoroughly think through every touch point, every social channel, the copy on your site, the design on your site, what happens when you meet people, how are you dressed, and how do your employees represent you? So I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but back to social. Yeah, I'd say being selective again is key, because you do want to make sure that you're creating content and copy and social posts where your prospects are. And I think back to budget, you don't want to, vanity metrics, I feel, is a bit of a problem. And again, personal case study here, when we're putting these videos up, I spend far too long, I think, watching how many likes I'm going to get on that video, because naturally as a human, you are vain a bit, right? So you kind of get sucked.
Get the dopamine hit.
Yeah, that wasn't as much as last time. I'm like, I should be focusing on something else. So, I think be selective about how much time you spend in social as well, and on this exercise. And yeah, try to look at the ROI, and try to look at, okay, maybe I should be closing more deals rather than just thinking about top of the funnel.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a question of looking at what's working and what's not working. And I think you raised an interesting point about, sort of making sure that everything is consistent. I think one of the issues that brands have, particularly in the B2B space, when they're doing messaging on social, is that they say, right, we have brand guidelines, and we've got tone of voice guidelines, and and for the website, this is what we sound like, and this is how we say things. And then they just take that and they just plonk it on their social media platform, and without even considering for a second what the context of that is going to be and how that is going to look on that platform. And that's why it doesn't work, because in order for it to be effective on social, it needs to look sociable. And if you're just planting your brand mission statement on your social posts, it's not going to work. Like, you need to have, as part of developing a tone of voice, you need to think about, how do we sound in certain situations? Where do we talk? And what topics do we talk about? All those kind of things play into where your brand is going to be found, and where it's going to be most effective, and how you're going to be able to turn something that is corporate but approachable and human.
And speaking of approachable, I think we've spoken a lot around how brands can use social media, but obviously the joy / the danger of social media is that it is a very democratic medium. It's a two-way street as well. And, people always say your brand is what your customers say it is. And I think obviously with social media, brands get a lot more direct feedback from their customers. So if they get it wrong, it's very public, and the dialogue about how they may have gotten it wrong plays out in the public sphere. So with that point of view, how is it best for brands to leverage that and use it as an asset to add to this authenticity and this very human tone of voice? And what should they avoid, or how do they diffuse a situation where they get it wrong?
The thing I would always say is you got to lean into it. Like, admit your mistakes, decide statements you're going to make, and then make those statements. Like, two very, very good examples. Lastminute.com, since lockdown, they've been having to give out refunds to people based on the holidays they've been put out, and they have not been very good at doing that in any way, shape, or form. And every single social media post you see, no matter what it is, you just get people moaning about the fact they haven't got their refund. It's very direct, and they just ignore it, and you never see a response, and they just close down all their social platforms, because probably because there is a volume issue there, but there was never some kind of like consistent sort of statement and acknowledgement of that. Compare that to KFC's. After they moved over to DHL for their chicken deliveries, and then nobody had any chicken, immediately they were on social being like, we literally fucked up. It's like you if you lean into it and you admit to your mistakes and you be transparent, people trust you a lot more, and you're able to resolve the problem. They turned that crisis into a branding exercise and into a marketing opportunity. They set up a microsite where they could say, okay, there's chicken at this particular outlet, and you can go to that outlet because we know there's chicken there. And created all this content off the back of something that, on the face of it, was a massive PR disaster. And a huge loss of revenue. But all they've seen is success off the back of that. And part of that is because the agency they use, Mother, obviously they were very good at what they do. But it's being responsive and leaning into it. Like, if you shy away from it on social, people will just call you out, and then they make you force the issue.
Yeah, and I think the way they dealt with it was not to be cliche, it was so on brand for them. It wasn't suddenly some corporate spokesperson coming out trying to diffuse the crisis. They were playful, and and just, like you say, all the content they got off the back of it was so them. So it just felt like you were with them in their adversity, and I think they engendered a lot of sympathy. Rather than anger during the great chicken crisis that emerged. So the observant viewer will notice, unfortunately, we have lost Ash, but this does allow me to segue nicely with our two remaining copywriting guests. We were talking about social and video, and in a world where actually everyone thinks marketing should be spent on YouTube stars and Instagram influencers, and now everyone wants to be a TikTok producer. Is copywriting old-fashioned? Does it still have a place in building a modern brand presence? I guess you probably have some firm views on this, but it'd really be great to share them with the audience.
How dare you? Shall I tackle that first? I'm sure.
Please do.
We've got some solidarity going on here. Very much so. Copywriting is crucial. It's really, really important, and I think that if you it depends how you perceive copywriting, right? It's not just words on a page. It's not just text, right? I think the art and science of copywriting starts with defining a voice, and that's come up a lot, right? Because we've talked about a brand being personified, and we're personifying it because people buy from people, and there's the human element, and there's the authenticity element there. So the first really step of copywriting is creating and building a voice and defining a voice, which is hugely important for whatever you're doing. All those elements you mentioned, right? TikTok, making YouTube videos, slides on LinkedIn. There is a voice involved in all of them, right? There are words involved, whether you're saying them or they're written. If there weren't any words, you'd have a very tough job of convincing and persuading people to buy from you, right? If it was just pure design, it just wouldn't work. And because of that, copywriting isn't just the art of written words, it's the art of kind of building a voice and giving meaning to a brand and giving meaning to certain campaigns and marketing. And again, when it comes to webinars, when it comes to creating video content like we're doing, it comes off as being perhaps it looks like it's off the cuff, but a little secret, we script it first, right? We script it, and then there's a bit off the cuff to get, to have that element that maybe makes it look a bit more authentic. It is authentic, but, just there can be unscripted elements, there can be scripted elements. But, a copywriter's job is to think about what's the aim of a piece of content. What are you trying to do with it? What's the goal? And then how do we join the dots? What words are needed to get them there? Is it persuade them? Is it educate them? Is it to be memorable and unique? So my argument is, very much need the art of copywriting in these times.
So what I'm hearing is you don't believe there will be a turn to branding through the medium of interpretive dance anytime soon.
No, but I'd like to see that.
Maybe that's the next video, Conrad.
Definitely.
So if anything, it actually sounds like the role of the copywriter, if you think of copywriters, most people think of the Don Draper stereotype writing taglines in Mad Men. It sounds like the role has expanded massively as we now have access to all these different media that we didn't have before. Robin, in your experience, do you see that? Do you see the role of the copywriter having sort of grown and changed as we've kind of got more modern technology at our fingertips?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people's perceptions of copywriting, I think part of it is this sort of Don Draper look of just being like, here's the tagline. I think the other thing, particularly in agency, is that copywriting equals blogging, and blogging equals organic search, and you're only doing it for SEO. And all we do is ABM. So what do I need SEO for? I know who my customers are, and I just go talk to them directly. What do I need copywriting for? And the reality is that copywriting is a core part of content marketing, and that is what you're doing. You're creating content to go out into the world and market to people. And at the end of the day, websites haven't gone anywhere. We are still going to be using websites. We still use email. And even though you're creating something that might be in a different format, like video, like we've got here, everything that sits around it requires a copywriter. So the promotional posts that you put around it, the write-up that you will do afterwards, the email that you send out. One of the things that we found a lot of when we have new copywriters come on is like, how do you write an email? Like, I've only done blogging for like the last 4 years. I never ever had to write an email before that has all the critical elements that go into successful email marketing. And as we get more channels and we have more tools at our dispense to go out into the world and create content, the copywriter's job will continue to evolve. We're not writing long form news copy anymore. That is almost certainly true, but there isn't a piece of marketing activity out there that doesn't require a copywriter. And then on top of that, it's running a business, right? Your business needs to have certain values and certain brand elements, and and creating just that internal stuff requires a copywriter, because you need somebody who's able to write stuff down in a way that people understand, so that it is effective, because otherwise you might as well not have it. There's no point in creating internal documents, policies, or anything like that if people don't understand how they work. So even if you're not even using a copywriter for marketing purposes, you still need one as an integral communicator to make it a business be functional.
Very well argued. Well, I'm convinced.
Good.
Just touching sort of as we start to wrap up, we talked about this as modern brand presence, and obviously what we're very aware of here at Wirelive, what we do is sort of the technological intensity and how tech keeps changing. What does that mean for people who want to stay on the front foot with building their brand? Is there something about branding that is eternal and pure and stays the same throughout, or is there an evolutionary job marketeers need to do to keep their brand relevant in line with how technology is evolving?
I'll attempt to tackle that. So I think a bit of both, really, to be honest. I think there's a core kind of brand strategy that needs to exist in the company. I mean, you can do all right without having a brand strategy. I'm not saying it's a must-have and you can't sell anything without having it. But I'd say that the core questions that you ask when it comes to brand strategy, and also when it comes to, let's say, content strategy, but the first questions you ask, not the last ones, which are like which platform, when, where, the first ones, which are why are we doing this? What's the goal, the why, the who's our audience, and who are we as a brand, and how do you bridge that gap? I think those core questions will remain and have done and will do, I don't know, forever, but for a long time. And then again, with the way that we look at either of those strategies, we'd usually start with those why and who questions, and then gradually filter down to the sort of more nitty gritty where, when's, sort of how, where, when, and I think I said all of them now, but yeah, to the details of exactly how that's going to manifest. But the essence of it are these almost kind of abstract, sort of higher tier, higher level questions that need to be answered first for the other ones to make sense. Because then it's hard to say, right, what platform are we on, or what technology are we going to use, if we haven't worked out who our ideal target buyer is and who we are. Does it make sense for us as a brand personality to be on that platform? Are our audience on that platform or using that technology? So I think a bit of both.
Yeah, I think in terms of branding specifically, I think it's never going to change, that you need to be, you need to be authentic, you need to be recognizable, you need all those core brand elements are never going to go away, because we in a capitalist system, that is the proven technique for getting people to identify with your brand and to connect with your brand. So those elements aren't going away. The thing I think brand people need to think about as we look at technology is, how can you leverage technology in a way that makes your brand activity more effective? And if you're going to use different platforms and new technology, how do you take those core values, those core elements of your brand, and how do they look in new technology? And that, working that bit out, yeah, it's going to take trial and error, but it's going to be an essential part of maintaining, being part of that sort of the modern branding kind of world, because it's going to keep changing. It's only going to get more, it's only going to change faster, right? So being able to translate your core brand elements onto different platforms and into different technologies is going to be the future.
Brilliant. Well, with that in mind, Rob, can you tell us who you think is the archetypal modern brand? Who's doing it really well, in your opinion, and what makes them so great?
I'm a huge KFC fan. I think their marketing and branding, I think, is absolutely brilliant. Mother are just smashing it. So I'm huge advocates of them. Given that I work in the B2B space, I do need to shout out a B2B brand. So, but I'm going to say Envision. They're a platform for designers, and the thing that I think that they do so very well is that their voice is perfectly pitched no matter where you are in the sales funnel. So if you're subscribed to their emails, if you're already bought into their values, they let you in a little bit more, and their voice suddenly becomes very sort of tongue-in-cheek, very jokey in a way that designers find funny. But if you look at their website, like it's very much targeted at people, at buyers, and being able to, but it's still true to who they are, and being able to sort of like wax and wane and sort of be fluid with your voice, but still remain authentic and recognizable, is a very, very rare gift. I think they do a very, very good job.
Fantastic. So in a way, quite human, sort of like for people who they're forming a first impression with, they're a little more reserved and cautious, as we all might be. And then once you're in the inner circle, you kind of get to know the real them a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, it's all very well saying you've got to be authentic and you should always be yourself, but there are situations where you dial it back, and then there are situations where you open up a little bit more, so it's and being able, and that is a natural part, and that again, that adds to authenticity in its own way.
Brilliant, thank you. Conrad, how about you? Who do you think is smashing it at the moment in terms of modern brand presence?
I'll go B2C and then B2B as well. So I talk quite a lot, or have in the past, about Red Bull. I don't think that they necessarily made the right moves during COVID, but let's say prior to COVID, I think that they're an exceptional brand. Like when it comes to brand and content marketing, if you think about Red Bull, what do you think about, right? Adventure, extreme sports, all of these things. What do they sell? Energy drinks, right? They've done so much when it comes to building something that's beyond a product, which I guess is what brand is all about. Something that you connect with, a theme, like a strong theme where you think that's them. And with content marketing, they just are probably in the B2C brands that has invested the most amount of their budget into what I'd call content marketing and event marketing and everything, just ridiculously so. Even the fact that when you pause for a second and go, they sell energy drinks, right? They could just be focused on the product, and their content could all be about, oh, this is what's in our drink, but then it would fizzle out and die. So I think maybe not during COVID. And innocent, I mean, we always say this is a copywriter, innocent, like have a great tone of voice. I think they've done a really good job during the crisis. And in our crisis comms webinars, we talked about them as an example and the fact that they immediately switched to value-driven brand building. You know, you can see there's a point where it was product focused, and then suddenly their Instagram posts went to like these kind of fun, quirky, valuable sort of 10 things to do at the weekend if you're stuck indoors. And it would be, one would be valuable, one would just be funny. So it's continuing that consistent sort of fun, innocent voice. So I think they're doing a great job. B2B, I mean, definitely our agency, the Creative Copywriter. But,
Smooth.
I think this I think MailChimp are quite a strong brand again in terms of their voice, the brand character. They're quite quirky, they're quite cool. I like Basecamp as well, actually. I think Basecamp there's so many project management tools out there, and again, the way that they use visuals and copy to just bring that element of authenticity and make it seem so human. In fact, you know, the design, they've got that design style where there's like obvious copy and then it looks like they've scribbled notes over the top, you know. And again, it just feels like a real human has been there and added extra thoughts. And so I think that again brings it back to that sort of real personified human element and that sense of authenticity. So those are my choices.
Yeah, and unsurprisingly, what unites all of them that you both said is that very human element, and you kind of feel that you feel genuine affection for that brand, and like they're almost someone you know and you care about what happens to them, and you feel like we have a relationship with them, which obviously is kind of what we all strive for when we're building brands.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, thank you guys. Loved our conversation. I could keep talking to you for the rest of the afternoon, but I'm sure you guys have got some words to polish and some more things for getting on with. But thank you so much for your time. So if you want to know more about modern brand presence, check out Conrad Sanders, Creative Copywriter. Check out Rob White at Blend B2B. And not forgetting Ash, who unfortunately we lost about 2/3 of the way through. Check out Ash Jones, who is CEO of Great Influence, if you want to know more about how to build an amazing